Chapter 4 of the Talisman. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Lizzie Driver. The Talisman by Sir Walter Scott. Chapter 4. Kenneth the Scot was uncertain how long his senses had been lost in profound repose, when he was roused to recollection by a sense of oppression on his chest, which at first suggested a flirting dream of struggling with a powerful opponent, and at length recalled him fully to his senses. He was about to demand who was there, when, opening his eyes, he beheld the figure of the anchorite, wild and savage-looking as we have described him, standing by his bedside, and pressing his right hand upon his breast, while he held a small silver lamp in the other. "Be silent," said the hermit, as the prostrate knight looked up in surprise. "I have that to say to you which yonder infidel must not hear." These words he spoke in the French language, and not in the lingua franca, or compound of Eastern and European dialects, which had hitherto been used amongst them. "Arise," he continued, "put on thy mantle, speak not, but tread lightly, and follow me." Sir Kenneth arose and took his sword. "It needs not," answered the anchorite in a whisper. "We are going where spiritual arms avail much, and fleshly weapons are but as the reed and the decayed gourd." The knight deposited his sword by the bedside as before, and armed only with his dagger, from which in this perilous country he never parted, prepared to attend his mysterious host. The hermit then moved slowly forwards, and was followed by the knight, still under some uncertainty whether the dark form which glided on before to show him the path was not, in fact, the creation of a disturbed dream. They passed like shadows into the outer apartment, without disturbing the Paynim Emir, who lay still buried in repose. Before the cross and altar in the outward room a lamp was still burning, a missal was displayed, and on the floor lay a discipline, or penitential scourge of small cord and wire, the lashes of which were recently stained with blood, a token, no doubt, of the severe penance of the recluse. Here Theodoric kneeled down, and pointed to the knight to take his place beside him upon the sharp flints, which seemed placed for the purpose of rendering the posture of reverential devotion as uneasy as possible. He read many prayers of the Catholic Church, and chanted, in a low but earnest voice, 3 of the penitential psalms. These last he intermixed with sighs and tears and convulsive throbs, which bore witness how deeply he felt the divine poetry which he recited. The Scottish knight assisted with profound sincerity at these acts of devotion, his opinion of his host beginning, in the meantime, to be so much changed that he doubted whether, from the severity of his penance and the ardour of his prayers, he ought not to regard him as a saint. And when they arose from the ground, he stood with reverence before him, as a pupil before an honoured master. The hermit was, on his side, silent and abstracted for the space of a few minutes. "Look into yonder recesses, my son," he said, pointing to the farther corner of the cell. "There thou wilt find a veil. Bring it hither." The knight obeyed, and in a small aperture cut out of the wall, and secured with a door of wicker, he found the veil inquired for. When he brought it to the light, he discovered that it was torn and soiled in some places with some dark substance. The anchorite looked at it with a deep but smothered emotion, and ere he could speak to the Scottish knight, was compelled to vent his feelings in a convulsive groan. "Thou art now about to look upon the richest treasure that the earth possesses," he at length said. "Woe is me that my eyes are unworthy to be lifted towards it. Alas! I am but the vile and despised sign, which points out to the wearied traveller a harbour of rest and security, but must itself remain forever without doors. In vain have I fled to the very depths of the rocks, and the very bosom of the thirsty desert. Mine enemy hath found me, even he whom I have denied has pursued me to my fortress." He paused again for a moment, and turning to the Scottish knight, said, in a firmer tone of voice, "You bring me a greeting from Richard of England?" "I come from the Council of Christian Princes," said the knight; "but the King of England being indisposed, I am not honoured with his Majesty's commands." "Your token?" demanded the recluse. Sir Kenneth hesitated. Former suspicions, and the marks of insanity which the hermit had formerly exhibited, rushed suddenly on his thoughts. But how suspect a man whose manners were so saintly? "My password," he said at length, "is this: Kings begged of a beggar." "It is right," said the hermit, while he paused. "I know you well, but the sentinel upon his post, and mine is an important one, challenges friend as well as foe." He then moved forward with the lamp, leading the way into the room which they had left. The Saracen lay on his couch, still fast asleep. The hermit paused by his side and looked down on him. "He sleeps," he said, "in darkness, and must not be awakened." The attitude of the Emir did indeed convey the idea of profound repose. One arm, flung across his body, as he lay with his face half turned to the wall, concealed, with its long and loose sleeve, the greater part of his face, but the high forehead was yet visible. Its nerves, which during his waking hours were so uncommonly active, were now motionless, as if the face had been composed of dark marble, and his long silken eyelashes closed over his piercing and hawk like eyes. The open and relaxed hand, and the deep, regular, and soft breathing, all gave tokens of the most profound repose. The slumberer formed a singular group, along with the tall forms of the hermit in his shaggy dress of goatskins, bearing the lamp, and the knight in his close leathern coat, the former with an austere expression of ascetic gloom, the latter with anxious curiosity deeply impressed on his manly features. "He sleeps soundly," said the hermit, in the same low tone as before, and repeating the words, though he had changed the meaning from that which is literal to a metaphorical sense, "he sleeps in darkness, but there shall be for him a dayspring. O Ilderim, thy walking thoughts are yet as vain and wild as those which are wheeling their giddy dance through thy sleeping brain, but the trumpet shall be heard, and the dream shall be dissolved." So saying, and making the knight a sign to follow him, the hermit went towards the altar, and passing behind it, pressed a spring, which, opening without a noise, showed a small iron door wrought in the side of the cavern, so as to be almost imperceptible, unless upon the most severe scrutiny. The hermit, ere he ventured fully to open the drawer, dropped some oil on the hinges which the lamp supplied. A small staircase, hewn in the rock, was discovered when the iron door was at length completely opened. "Take the veil which I hold," said the hermit in a melancholy tone, "and blind mine eyes, for I may not look on the treasure which thou art presently to behold, without sin and presumption." Without reply, the knight hastily muffled the recluse's head in the veil, and the latter began to ascend the staircase as one too much accustomed to the way to require the use of light, while at the same time he held the lamp to the Scot, who followed him for many steps up the narrow ascent. At length they rested in a small vault of irregular form, in one nook of which the staircase terminated, while in another corner a corresponding stair was seen to continue the ascent. In a third angle was a Gothic door, very rudely ornamented with the usual attributes of clustered columns and carving, and defined by a wicket, strongly guarded with iron, and studded with large nails. To this last point the hermit directed his steps, which seemed to falter as he approached it.